The division between Amaka and her family grew deeper each passing day, until one night, she decided she couldn't take it any longer. She waited until the house was quiet. Only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. Then, she got out of the bed and made her way to her parents' room. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She stood outside their door for what felt like eternity, gathering the courage to speak. Finally, she knocked softly, her hand trembling. After a moment, her mother's voice called out, muffled by sleep, "Who is that?" "It's Amaka," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I talk to you?" There was a pause, and then the sound of shuffling feet as Ifeoma opened the door. She looked at her daughter with a mix of surprise and irritation. "What is it, Amaka? It's late." Amaka hesitated. Her eyes darted to her father, who was still lying on the bed, half awake. She took a deep breath, forcing the words out. I need to know why you don't love me." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, thick with emotion. Ifeoma blinked, taken aback by the directness of the question. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Of course we love you." "No, you don't," Amaka insisted, her voice trembling. "You love Nkechi, not me. I have tried so hard to make you proud, to be like her, but it's never enough. You always find something wrong with me." Ifeoma sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose as if trying to ward off a headache. "Amaka, you are being ridiculous. We love you both. But you have to understand, you are different from Nkechi. She's easier to deal with. You always getting into trouble, always pushing back." Amaka's heart sank at her mother's words. She had known, deep down, this was how they felt. But hearing it sound out loud was like a punch to the gut. "So, it's my fault?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "It's my fault that you don't love me?" Chinonso, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. "Amaka, it's not that we don't love you, but you have to understand that your behavior makes it hard for us sometimes. If you could just be more like Nkechi, things would be easier for everyone." The tears that had been threatening to spill over finally did, streaming down Amaka's face as she struggled to keep her voice steady. "I am not Nkechi," she cried, her voice breaking. "I will never be like her. Why can't you love me for whom I am?" Her parents exchanged a glance, unsure of what to respond. Finally, Ifeoma sighed again, reaching out to place a hand on Amaka's shoulder. "You are our daughter, Amaka. We do love you, but you need to learn to control yourself, to stop causing so much troubles. We just want the best for you." But the words felt hollow to Amaka, like a lie she had been told many times. She pulled away from her mother, her tears still flowing. "You don't want what is best for me," she whispered. "You want me to be someone I am not." Without another word, she turned and fled the room, her sob echoing in the quiet room. Nkechi, who had heard the commotion from her room, met her sister on the hallway, her heart aching at the sight of Amaka's tear-streaked face. "Amaka, wait," Nkechi called after her, but Amaka didn't stop. She ran to her room and slammed the door behind her, the sound reverberating through the house. Nkechi hesitated outside the door, Unsure of what to do, she wanted to comfort her sister, to tell her that everything would be okay, but she knew that Amaka wouldn't believe her. After a moment, she decided to give her some space, hoping that the anger and pain would pass. But deep down, Nkechi knew that things were only getting worse, and that the rift between them was growing too wide to bridge. The tension in Okeke's household had reached its peak. By the time the village annual New Yam festival rolled around, the festival was a time of celebration, where the entire village came together to give thanks for the harvest, dance, sing, and feast. It was an event that everyone looked forward to, but this time, the air in Okeke's house was thick with unresolved emotions. The day of festival, Ifeoma woke the twins early to help with the preparations. Nkechi was assigned to assist with the cooking, while Amaka was tasked with fetching water and helping set up the decorations. The tension between Amaka and her parents were palpable, but they all carried on, trying to pretend that everything was normal. As the day went on, the village square filled with people, and the sound of drumming and singing filled the air. Amaka tried to lose herself in the festivities, hoping that the joy of the occasion would lift her spirits. But her heart felt heavy, weighed down by the events of the previous night. During the festival, Amaka was asked to carry a large pot of palm oil to the elders' table, where the special dishes were being prepared. It was a simple task, one she had done many times before, but today her mind was elsewhere, her thoughts consumed by the hurt and the anger she felt towards her parents. As she approached the elders' table, her foot caught on a loose stone, and she stumbled. The pot of the palm oil slipped from her hands and crashed to the ground, the red liquid spilling out and splattering across the white cloth that had been laid out for the feast. There was a moment of stunned silence as everyone turned to see what had happened. Then, the elder's wife, whose white wrapper had been stained by the oil, let out a cry of dismay. "What have you done, Amaka?" she exclaimed, her voice filled with anger. Amaka stood frozen, her heart racing as she stared at the mess she had made. Before she could respond, Ifeoma was at her side, her face a mask of fury. "Amaka, how could you be so careless?" Ifeoma shouted, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Do you know how important this fix is? You have ruined everything." The villagers began to murmur among themselves, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others whispering that this was just another example of Amaka's troublesome nature. Amaka felt the heat of their stares, the weight of their judgment pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. Nkechi, who had been helping serve food nearby, rushed over to her sister's side. "Mama, it was an accident," she said, her voice pleading. "She didn't mean to." "Enough, Nkechi," Ifeoma snapped, cutting her off. "You always defend her, but look at what she has done. She embarrassed us in front of the whole village." Amaka felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't stand there any longer, couldn't bear the humiliation of being scolded in front of everyone. Without a word, she turned and ran, pushing through the crowd and fleeing the village square. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the forest, where the trees stood tall and silent, offering her the only comfort she knew: She collapsed onto the ground, her body shaking with sobs. She felt like a failure, like no matter what she did, she could never do anything right. Nkechi found her there. A few minutes later, she knelt beside her sister, her own heart breaking at the sight of Amaka's despair. "Amaka, I am sorry," she whispered, reaching out to touch her sister's shoulder. But Amaka jerked away from her touch, her eyes blazing with anger and hurt. "Why are you here, Nkechi?" she demanded, her voice raw. "You should be with them, enjoying the festival, not here with me." "I'm here because you are my sister," Nkechi replied, her voice trembling. "I don't care about the festival, I care about you." "Well, maybe you shouldn't," Amaka shot back, her voice laced with bitterness. "Maybe it would be better if you left me alone. Everyone else would be happier if I wasn't around." Nkechi's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had never seen Amaka like this before. She consumed by anger and self-loathing. "Don't say that, Amaka," she finally managed to choke out. "Please, don't say that." But Amaka wasn't listening. She stood up, wiping the tears from her face with the back of her hand. "I am tired, Nkechi," she said, her voice flat. "I'm tired of trying to be someone that I am not. I'm tired of always being the one who gets blamed. Maybe it will be better if I just disappear." The words sent a chill down Nkechi's spine, and she reached out to grab her sister's arm. "No, Amaka, don't say that. You can't mean that." But Amaka just shook her head, pulling away from Nkechi's grab. "You don't understand, Nkechi. You have always been the good one, the only one they love. You don't know what it is to be like me." Before Nkechi could say anything more, Amaka turned and ran deeper into the forest, disappearing among the trees. Nkechi stood there, her heart pounding with fear and guilt, not knowing what to do or how to help her sister. She eventually returned to the village, her mind racing with worry. She told their parents what had happened, but they dismissed her concerns, saying that Amaka would come back when she had calmed down. But deep down, Nkechi knew that something had changed, that her sister was slipping away from her, and she don't know how to bring her back. The days after the New Yam festival were filled with silence. Amaka hasn't come home after their argument in the forest. Nkechi tried to believe that Amaka would return soon, just as she always did. But deep down, she felt uneasy. Something didn't feel right this time. Each day, she watched and waited, hoping to see Amaka walk back into the compound, but she never came. Nkechi's parents, Chinonso and Ifeoma, didn't seem as worried. "Amaka just needs some time," Chinonso would say, trying to comfort Nkechi. "She will come back when she's ready." But Nkechi wasn't convinced. She could see that Amaka had been deeply hurt, and the finality in her sister's words during their argument made her heart ache with fear. Days passed, and Amaka was still missing. Nkechi couldn't take the uncertainty any longer. She knew she had to do something, so she decided to go look for her sister herself. Early in the morning, just as the sun was rising, she set out toward the forest. As she walked, Nkechi called out for her sister. "Amaka! Amaka! Where are you?" Her voice echoed through the trees, but there was no reply. The forest, usually so peaceful, now felt strange and scary. The tall trees cast long shadows on the ground. making everything look dark and mysterious. Nkechi tried to stay calm, but with every step, her fear grew. What if Amaka was hurt? What if something terrible had happened to her? These thoughts raced through Nkechi's mind, making her heart beat faster. She continued to search, walking deeper into the forest, calling Amaka's name over and over again. The hours passed, and the sun was now high in the sky. But Nkechi hadn't found any sign of her sister. Exhausted and scared, she reached the riverbank, a place they had often visited together. As she walked along the river edge, something caught her eyes. A piece of cloth snagged on the branch that stuck out into the water. Nkechi's breath caught into her throat. The cloth looked familiar. It was the same color of the dress Amaka had been wearing the last time she saw her. No, please no, Nkechi whispered to herself. Her hands trembling as she reached for the cloth. The fabric was wet and cold, sending a chill through her fingers. Her heart raced as she looked out over the calm water. What had happened here? Panic surged through Nkechi, and she rushed into the water, the cold water soaking her feet. Amaka, she shouted, her voice filled with desperation. Amaka, where are you? But the only sound was the gentle lapping of the water against the shore and the rustling of the leaves in the wind. Tears filled Nkechi's eyes as she searched the water, her hands skimming the surface, hoping to find any sign of her sister. She waded deeper into the river. Suddenly, her hand brushed against something soft under the water. Nkechi froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had to dive down, but she was terrified of what she might find. Taking a deep breath, she plunged her hand back into the water and grabbed the object. When Nkechi imagined, she was holding Amaka's lifeless body. Her sister's eyes were closed, and her dark hair floated gently in the water. Amaka's skin was cold to the touch, and her once bright face was now pale and still. No! No! Nkechi cried out, collapsing onto the riverbank with Amaka into the arms. Tears streamed down her face as she held her sister close, rocking back and forth in grief. Please wake up, Amaka. Please don't leave me. But Amaka didn't respond. She was gone. And Nkechi felt as though her own heart had been torn in two. The world around her seemed to blur as she cried, her sobs echoing through the quiet forest. Nkechi didn't know how long she stayed there, holding Amaka's body and weeping. The sun was setting, casting long shadow over the river, and the forest was growing dark. Finally, with her body aching and her heart shattered, Nkechi knew she had to go back to the village. She had to tell her parents what had happened, even though the thought of it filled her with dread. With great effort, Nkechi stood up, lifting Amaka's body in her arms. The walk back to the village was slow and painful. Her legs felt like they could give out at any moment, and the weight of her grief made each step harder than the last. But she kept going, driven by the need to bring Amaka home, even if it was too late to save her. When Nkechi finally reached their compound, it was already dark. The lantern inside their house were alight, casting a warm glow in the walls. Chinonso and Ifeoma were seated outside, waiting for their daughters to return. At first, they didn't realize what had happened. They stood up as Nkechi approached, their faces filled with concern. Nkechi, where have you been? Ifeoma asked. But when she saw the limp figure in Nkechi's arms, her eyes widened in horror. Amaka! Ifeoma screamed, rushing forward. Chinonso followed, her face pale with shock. Nkechi couldn't speak. She could only stand there, trembling, and her parents took Amaka from her arms. Ifeoma's cries of anguish filled the night as she clutched her daughter's lifeless body. "No! No! No! This can't be happening!" she wailed. Tears streamed down her face. Chinonso sank to his knees beside her, his hand shaking as she touched Amaka's cold skin. "What happened?" Chinonso asked, his voice choked with emotion. "How did it happen?" Nkechi shook her head, unable to find the words. All she could do was to stare at her sister, feeling numb and empty inside. The world around her seemed to fade away as she was consumed by the grief. The village was silent as Ifeoma's cries echoed through the night. Neighbors began to gather, their faces filled with sorrow as they realized what had happened. Some tried to comfort Ifeoma and Nonso, while others stood back, their hearts heavy with sadness. Nkechi felt a hand on her shoulder, and she looked up to see one of the elders standing beside her. "Come inside, my child," the elder said gently. "You need to rest." But Nkechi shook her head. "I can't leave her," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't leave Amaka." The elder nodded, understanding the pain Nkechi was feeling. He didn't push any further, letting Nkechi stay by her sister's side as the night wore on. As the hours passed, Nkechi sat quietly, holding Amaka's hand and staring into the darkness. She thought about all the time they had spent together, all the laughter and the joy they had shared. And now it was all gone, taken away in the instant. Nkechi knew that life would never be the same without Amaka. She had lost not just a sister, but a part of herself. And as the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, she realized that the pain of that loss would stay with her forever. The village was silent after the news of Amaka's death spread. Everyone heard about what happened, and the once lively Okeke's household became a place of sadness. The laughter that used to fill the home was gone, replaced by an emptiness that seems to swallow everyone in it. Nkechi couldn't stop crying. She felt like her heart was broken, and she couldn't get rid of the heavy feelings inside her. Every day, she sat by the river where she had found Amaka, staring at the river. She blamed herself for what had happened. "If only I had been kinder. If only I had listened more," she thought over and over again. She stopped eating and didn't want to sleep because whenever she closed her eyes, she saw Amaka's face. Chinonso, her father, and Ifeoma, her mother, were also in deep sorrow. They couldn't believe that their daughter was gone. The guilt they felt was like a sharp knife that wouldn't stop cutting. Chinonso often sat in silence, holding his head in his hands, thinking of all the times he had been too harsh on Amaka. "I should have been a better father," he would whisper to himself when no one was around. Ifeoma was not different. She remembered every harsh word she had ever spoken to Amaka. She couldn't stop thinking that maybe, just maybe, if she had been more loving, her daughter would still be alive. "We failed her," Ifeoma said one day, her voice breaking as she spoke to Chinonso. "We are too harsh on her." The villagers who once talked about Amaka as if she was cursed now spoke of her with pity. They realized that they had been wrong to judge her. Some of them came to Okeke family to offer their condolences, They brought food and tried to comfort them, but Chinonso and Ifeoma couldn't bring themselves to talk much. They felt too guilty to accept the kindness. Weeks passed, but the pain in Okeke's household didn't go away. Nkechi grew thinner and weaker. Her once bright eyes now dull and sad. She couldn't sleep because of the nightmares. In her dreams, she saw Amaka's lifeless body in the water, reaching out to her, pulling her down into the depths. Nkechi would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart racing, feeling like she couldn't breathe. One night, as they sat in the dim light of their small living room, Chinonso looked at his wife, tears brimming in his eyes. "We are losing Nkechi too," he said softly. "She's fading away before our eyes. I can't bear it, Ifeoma. We can't lose another daughter." Ifeoma nodded, her own tears spilling over. "What can we do, Chinonso? How do we stop this? How do we make things right?" In their desperation, they decided to seek help from the village elders, who were wise and had guided the village for many years. The next day, they walked to the elders' hut, holding each other's hand for support. The elders welcomed them inside and listened carefully as Chinonso and Ifeoma poured out their hearts, telling them about the guilt that was eating them alive. "We were too hard on Amaka," Chinonso admitted, his voice shaking, "and now she's gone. How do we live with this? How do we bring peace to our family?" The elders nodded, understanding the deep pain and regret in Chinonso's words. After a long silence, one of the elders, an old man with a white beard and wise eyes, spoke. "It is true that you have made mistakes," he said gently, "but you are not alone. We all make mistakes. The important thing now is to find a way to heal. You must ask for forgiveness from the Spirit, from each other, and from yourselves." The elder paused, looking at them with kindness. "We will hold a cleansing ceremony for Amaka," he continued. "It will be a way to honor her and to help her spirit find peace. But it will also be for you, to help you let go of your guilt and begin to heal. The ceremony will take place by the river, where she was found. The whole village will come to support you." When Nkechi heard about the ceremony, she didn't want to go at the first. The thought of returning to the river, the place where she found Amaka, was too painful. She shook her head when her parents told her about it. "I can't go back there," she whispered. "I can't see the place again." But Chinonso and Ifeoma gently encouraged her. "We understand how you feel, Nkechi," her mother said, her voice full of love. "But this ceremony is important. It's not just for Amaka, it's for us too. We need to let go of the pain that is tearing us apart. We need to find peace, and we need to do it together." Nkechi looked into her mother's eyes and saw the sadness there, but also the hope. She realized that her parents were suffering just as much as she was, and that they needed her. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay, Mama," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will go." The day of the ceremony arrived, and the entire village gathered by the river. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the water. The elders led the ceremony, chanting prayers and offering blessings to guide Amaka's spirit to peace. Nkechi stood by her parents, holding their hands. As the elders spoke, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. For the first time since Amaka's death, she felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. She looked at the water, the same water that had taken her sister from her and felt a small spark of hope. The ceremony ended with everyone placing white flowers in the river as a sign of peace and letting go. Nkechi watched as the flowers floated away, carried by the gentle current. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her grief slowly lifting. She knew that she would never forget Amaka, but she also knew that she needed to keep living for herself, for her parents, and for the memory of her sister. As they turned to leave, Nneka, the old wise woman, placed a comforting hand on Nkechi's shoulder. Your sister's spirit will find peace now. It is important to remember the lessons learned and to honor her memory by living with kindness and love. Nkechi nodded, wiping her tears. Thank you, Nne. We will never forget Amaka. We will strive to be better, to show love and compassion, and to honor her memory. The family walked back to their home in silence. Each step filled a mix of sadness and a sense of resolution. They knew that while the guilt of the past could never be erased, they had taken a step towards healing. The ceremony had given them a chance to express their regrets and seek for forgiveness. Nkechi, Chinonso, and Ifeoma knew that they had to move forward, carrying with them the lessons they had learned. They would remember Amaka always, but they hoped that her spirit had finally found the rest she deserved. And so, the river carried away Amaka's spirit, and the Okeke's family began a new chapter in their lives, marked by the deep understanding that love and compassion must always guide their actions. The ceremony had brought closure to their grief, and they hoped that, in time, their hearts will heal from the wound of the past. The lesson from this story is that when we hurt someone, it's important to say sorry and show that we care. We should always try to be kind and understanding to others, so we don't make them feel sad or hurt. Saying sorry and making up for our mistakes can help heal relationships and bring peace. Thank you for watching this amazing story. Please kindly like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. See you on the next video.